Attorney Michael Springmann, and then after Springmann, Thompson, and Rupert, and then we'll have questions. Yes, thank you very much. Attorney Springmann, oh yes, you know, he knows what to do. But your right hand isn't raised. And yes, your Bible is the truth. Do you swear to tell this commission the truth?
I do indeed, under the laws of perjury of the United States of America and the sovereign state of New York.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Thank you very much. Have a seat. Barry, don't you go anywhere.
Oh, okay.
We're building to the climax. Okay, Mr. Springmann.
I'm Mike Springmann. In the past, I had been a Foreign Service officer, diplomat with the Department of State. I'm currently an attorney in private practice in Washington, D.C. And I'm quite happy to be here. I'm surprised to be here because last year the Justice Department seized my email accounts and put a client of mine on the no-fly list. So I wasn't quite sure what I would run into at Dulles Airport today. And alhamdulillah, I got on the airplane with no trouble at all. But I'm here to talk to you about visas. Visas issued to terrorists at the CIA's consulate at Jeddah, principal city of the Hijaz in the western part of Saudi Arabia. Recently, 3 years ago, we had 15 of the 19 hijackers get visas from the CIA's consulate at Jeddah. They didn't get them from London or Frankfurt or Cairo. They got them from Jeddah. They didn't get them from Dhahran in the eastern province. They didn't get them from Riyadh, the capital of the country. They got them from the American Consulate General in Jeddah. And I thought that was very peculiar. And I had thought that all of the hell that I had raised almost 15 years ago and in the intervening period might have done some good. I was wrong. When I went out to Jeddah in 1987, I started hearing about problems that they had there. They had issues with servants and issues with politically important people. And nobody could explain to me exactly what the problem was. I heard it from the ambassador. I heard it from a couple of people in the administrative offices for that section of the world in the State Department. But when I got there, I started getting pressure to issue visas to people who really had no ties either to Saudi Arabia or their own country. As an example, a Sudanese refugee. He couldn't go back to the Sudan. He was unemployed in Saudi Arabia, yet the political officer wanted him to get a visa to go to Washington, D.C. I objected. I objected strenuously. And the chief of the consular section issued him the visa. And when I asked him why, he said, well, for national security reasons. As time went on, it got worse. I was being pressured by the Consul General, J. Philip Freres, by a consular officer, I'm sorry, not a consular officer, a commercial officer, and various other people throughout the consulate. We need a visa for this guy. It wasn't a visa for my friend. It wasn't a visa for a prospective business contact. It was for somebody like the two Pakistanis who were going to a trade show in the United States. They couldn't name the trade show. They couldn't name the city in which it was being held. But a CIA case officer, concealed in the commercial section, demanded a visa for these people within the hour of my refusing them. And I said, no, they can't tell me where they're going. They can't tell me why they're going. The law is very clear. These are intending immigrants unless and until they can prove otherwise, and they haven't done it. Do you have some information that was not available to me when they applied? He said, no. I said, they're not going. He went to Justice Stevens, the chief of the consular section, and got a visa for these guys. This went on all the time I was there. It was the consul general, it was these other people, and it finally got to the point where Jay Freres would tell me, if you want a career in the Foreign Service, you'll issue this visa. And I staff said, don't be stupid, Mike. Give him the visa and then write down on the application form who ordered that the visa be given. I kept a file on this. And when I left Saudi Arabia, the file was shredded. Nobody knows who did it. Nobody knows who gave the order. Nobody knows why. But I complained to Justice Stevens. I complained to Stephanie Smith, the counselor for consular affairs in Riyadh. And I said, well, you know, we have these problems, and you really ought to do this. And Stephanie suggested that when I went back to Washington, I should talk to the Bureau of Consular Affairs. Well, shortly before I left, the State Department has something called an inspection team come out. I'll try not to talk about jargon and inside government speak to you. It's basically a management practice to examine how a foreign service post is functioning. Does it do things according to the law? Does it do things according to regulation? Is there a more efficient way of doing this particular action? So I was told by a contact outside of the consulate, don't talk about this, don't talk about the visas. And if you do, you're going to lose your job. Well, I didn't think so, but I decided it would be smart not to talk too much about it. Well, when Joseph P. O'Neill came through, he pressured me for an hour to talk about this. And I said, no. He said, but I know this. And he simply ran through exactly everything I knew about the situation, plus a little bit more besides. And it went on and on and on, and finally wore me down. Oh, it's going to help the efficiency of the Foreign Service, et cetera. So I told him this. Then things went from bad to worse. The Consul General was livid, wrote a remarkably negative efficiency report and said I shouldn't be in the Foreign Service at all. And I had been told that this was a visa scam, and it certainly seemed that way to me. I was told, look who needs the money. And the price supposedly for these visas was $2,500. And it was, the king's barber's servant to get a visa. Freres was seen filling out visa applications for people in the consulate. It was just absolutely incomprehensible to me. And people I talked to who had been there really didn't want to say much more about it. And it wasn't until I was out of the Foreign Service, when my appointment had been terminated for unspecified reasons, that I learned from three good sources. Joe Trento, the journalist, a fellow attached to a university in Washington, D.C., and a guy with expert knowledge on the Middle East who had worked for a government agency. They said, it's very simple. The CIA and its asset Osama bin Laden were recruiting terrorists for the Afghan war. They were sending them to the United States for training, for rewards, for whatever purpose, and then sending them on to Afghanistan. And most likely, the problems they had with the liquor at the consulate, large amounts of it disappearing, it being sold at very high markups, and so forth, was being used to fund this. Well, that explained the whole thing. That explained why nobody wanted to talk to me about this. It explained why the file was shredded. And it explained why they were so mad at me, because I apparently had disrupted their way of pass and go and collecting $200 or more. Well, when I learned this, I went to the FBI. I went to Congress, the House Subcommittee on International Affairs, where I was told, what's the matter? Don't you like the CIA? I went to the Justice Department's Office of Professional Responsibility, the section charged with corruption in government and crooked officials. Didn't want to talk to me. I managed to write a few articles and get them published in Unclassified, the Bureau of the Association of National Security Alumni. When September 11th happened, Covert Action Quarterly published an account of this that I had written. Admittedly, it wasn't my best work, but it basically put down what I'm telling you folks right now. And then there was media interest. Not American media interest, but media interests from the British Broadcasting Corporation, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, RAI, Radio Televisione Italiana, the Italian radio and television service, Canal Plus, a French channel. Unfortunately, no Germans, even though I do know some German journalists. But the Washington Post, which I approached, the New York Times, which I approached, the Los Angeles Times, which I approached, couldn't be bothered to learn anything at all about this. They didn't ask me any questions. I did get a lunch from the Los Angeles Times, and they looked at some of the material I had, but that was as far as it went. The Associated Press did a short article when people in the government began, I think, getting embarrassed about reading about themselves. But the Wire Service article disappeared. Nobody ever said they'd seen it anywhere in the country. I've been interviewed by a couple of smaller, non-mainstream radio stations. About a year or two ago, I was on Amy Goodman's show, Democracy Now! With Greg Palast. But it's beginning to come out in the open. Greg Palast devoted a few paragraphs in his book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Craig Unger's book, House of Bush, House of Saud, has a couple of paragraphs devoted to me and the situation in Jeddah. And Joe Trento is publishing a book next month, inshallah, called Prelude to Terror, which goes into detail on the situation at the CIA's consulate in Jeddah and how terrorists got their visas. But I think also this business of Visa Express that Joel Malbury and others have played up is something of a red herring or a little bit of misdirection. Saudis, people with Saudi passports, didn't have to appear in front of a consular officer. Their personal appearances were waived. It's a good way to get people past the visa officer who asks awkward questions like I did, because you put them in a pile and you send them through a reputable travel agent to the consulate. They did this in Latin America, according to Selvino Castillo, a drug enforcement agency officer. He said this was one of the agency's favorite tricks of slipping people into the country. But the difficulty is nobody wants to hear about this.
Mike, I'm going to just remind you 1 minute, okay?
1 minute?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, I think that the way to reform things and put an end to this is to stop the secrecy. My Freedom of Information Act request and its lawsuit was sealed as a threat to national security. It was resealed within the last 2 weeks by Royce Lamberth, the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. He's on the panel of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act judges. So what we really got to do is abolish the CIA's Directorate of Operations, the people who overthrow governments and assassinate politicians the U.S. doesn't like. And we've got to cut their budget of all the intelligence services by 25% this year. So if you folks have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
We will pose our questions at the end, along with the members of the audience.